And welcome everyone. My name is Laura Sear, and I get the honor of facilitating this session briefly today, which means I'm not important at all. I just want to make sure that we're all off to the right on the right path, that everybody has what they need. My job will also be to put a very, very short evaluation link in the chat at the end of the session. And we really do appreciate just a little bit of feedback. So thank you for thinking about that in advance. In the meantime, I'm going to turn it right over to Dr. Deborah Lukovich, who's a writer, a speaker, and a coach with midlife unraveling, research on women, sex, and God, moving to a beach town, forced a reunion with a buried and creative part of herself. So her writing offers equal parts entertainment and healing. She's working to publish her memoir, When Sex Meets God, and her research on women's experience of reconciling sexuality and spirituality.
Mhm.
Deborah's writing makes space for conversation about topics that are difficult or embarrassing to talk about with depth and often humor. Her posts and stories are inspired by her most awkward, intense, and meaningful experiences. So thank goodness somebody is making space for this. As a coach, she calls herself a reflection partner. She's passionate about helping people come into deeper relationships with self and with others. She uses a framework based on Jung's theory of individuation and teaches tools for harnessing the wisdom of the unconscious. So I know I speak for the entire community conference steering committee and everyone here today in welcoming Deborah Lukovich. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, since there's so few of us, I don't mind if we're just sitting in a room together. So if you want to unmute, go ahead. Or if you got a noisy background, mute if you want. I love to, I know Adelaide isn't feeling well, so she's going to keep her camera off. Jean, if you're willing to show your face, that would be really great, because you couldn't get away with not showing your face if I was actually there. And oh, thank you. I'm sorry if I pressured you to, reveal yourself, but I appreciate it. And so, oh, now I need to share I almost forgot about my slides. So share screen. I should have done this already. I'm sorry. Okay. Oh no. I should have done this already. Now, Laura, you might have to help me.
Sure.
I have my presentation open.
Okay.
So now how do I share it with you guys?
Yep, so just press the little share screen button,
Okay.
and then you should see some
Here it is.
selections and click on the one that you want to be showing.
Thank you. Okay, there it is. And then I'm going
Perfect.
to view presentation.
Excellent.
Yay. Okay, it worked. Oops, that's not the one I want though. Okay. So there's me. I think I'll start. This is the third year. In fact, Bernadine, have you been to one of my workshops before?
I bet I was.
Yes, you look so familiar to me. So anyway, this is my third conversation, and I feel like it's just a continuing conversation because when I started presenting 3 years ago, it was like I was bringing form to stuff that I was going through in my research, my analysis, and my own lived experience. And so in a way, this feels like a continuation of that conversation, so I'm going to give some context for the others who weren't there. Kind of bottom line, the first part of my life, I'll say, the first part of my life was lived in a very masculine way, not meaning I'm not pretty and that sort of thing, but masculine energy of doing, achieving, thinking, intellectualizing, creating things, businesses, nonprofits, parenting, all that kind of stuff. And then came the unraveling of my life. And really all of that had to be let go. And then my experience in a very unexpected way caused me to reconnect with the feminine, which is the place of not only relationship, but also the body and nature and sexuality and creativity before it takes form. And so often when you live in a very one-sided masculine way, which women really have had to in order to fit in, then when it falls apart, you really go, whoa, to the other side. So I was really swept up in experiences that I had to have. And then this like new creative urge like bust out of me. It was like in my body, and it got released. So that sort of is like a Reader's Digest version of my life. So now I'm going into a different phase of my life. So 2 years ago, when I came to Alverno, we talked about what I call collective wounds that both women and men carry that get in the way of deep and intimate relationship. And we talked about these wounds resulting from how the feminine and the masculine energies were imprisoned in the form of men and women by tying them to gender, also in a way that denigrated the feminine and women's bodies and sexuality and nature. And we also talked about how this is not just bad for women, it's bad for men too, because we have this hardwired need to connect. And in order to connect, you have to be in connection with your feminine. You have to let your guard down. We also, last year, I talked a little bit about I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Brene Brown's research on shame and vulnerability. And then you might not be familiar with Carol Gilligan's work on how she was trying to get to the bottom of why is patriarchy so stubborn when most women and even most men would like it to go away and get beyond it. And she talks about her theory of how patriarchy is actually a defense mechanism now. It's a mechanism that we use because we can't sustain the vulnerability needed for deep connection. So it's just something now that's like become part of our psychic DNA. Again, we talked about how patriarchy is not so much about men as is a system of domination. It's a system of hierarchy and ranking. And this ranking doesn't only play out between men and women, it plays out between men and men. There are men's men and there are other men, and women, and rich and poor, and adults and children. And, this sort of me and the other is really a patriarchal idea. So this is a little bit on the Dominator. Riane Eisler, in her book, Sacred Pleasure, names patriarchy really more correctly as a dominator model of social organization. And she talks about all the latest theories about where patriarchy came from, that it really wasn't a natural evolution. It was something that came from a particular area of the globe, and it was really forced on other communities. This model thrives on trauma, which causes people to shut down emotionally, be defensive, and strike first out of fear of being hurt by the other person. So by the end of last year's workshop, it was really wonderful because it was the participants who beautifully articulated this balance required to hold the tension between personal wounds and collective wounds that live in our bodies, and also have appreciation for how men in particular have also been wounded by the system of patriarchy. So finally, then I shared lots of personal stories about how, this realization for me was really life-changing. And this is in my research and my memoir, through this experience during my midlife unraveling, I came to experience a really intimate connection with myself, with another romantic partner, and with something transcendent, with God or the divine or whatever you want to call it. I was, if I wouldn't have been swept up in it, I wouldn't have gone with it. But I literally was swept up in it, and I allowed myself to go with it. My personal experiences included in my research and memoir, I said. So last year we dug in deeper into sort of why is patriarchy so stubborn, and then it thrives on conflict and trauma and division and fear. And now you can see all this climaxing right now in the world, right? In the last year, it's been very interesting to look at what's going on through a depth psychology lens. And then we also went deeper into how it is not an accident that women's bodies and sexuality are this battleground of patriarchy, and where patriarchy is really trying to maintain its survival, and how religion has acted to reinforce this system by making pain and suffering sacred and denigrating sexuality and spirituality. So we also discussed how reconciling sexuality and spirituality, especially for women, is really critical to dismantling the system of hierarchy and ranking. And then the final thing I talked about was trying to shift this language from fighting against to transcending. And I'm sure that you guys know that when we fight against things, we only just cause them to further entrench themselves, because there's this what we resist persists. So if you're familiar with Marianne Williamson, who was a presidential candidate, she's a spiritual teacher, and she was laughed at for wanting to create a Department of Peace. And I was like, well, it makes perfect sense. If we want peace, we should focus on things that, when we look through the lens, that actually will promote peace, as opposed to fighting against everything that's not peace. So this year, I want to talk about how fighting patriarchy is a losing battle. So I want to transcend the fighting. It's the wrong thing to focus on. So so when I talked about Marianne Williamson, it's sort of the same thing with patriarchy. So instead of fighting against something we don't want, instead being driven by what does it look like to actually have reconciliation? So that's like a really different question. What does it look like if we do have deep connection with each other? What does it look like if there is equality, right? So we have so much focus on fighting inequality. And I really like the theme of this conference because it is about promoting inclusion and equity, as opposed to fighting against the things that are the opposite of that. So C.G. Jung has this theory he calls the transcendent third. And what it is this concept of the only way to really transcend where we are is to be able to hold the tension between the two things that we think are opposing. So you can kind of see it. So even people who are fighting for justice, let's say, or promoting equity, even they will refer to others as the other, right? So for example, when in the last election, 2016, when the person that I wanted to win did not win, and my children and my husband were on the same page, I was really disheartened by how my daughter referred to the people who are less tolerant, let's say. So, and I was like, no, now you are making an other, and that does not help us transcend. And there is a way to look at other people and separate their behavior from the causes of their behavior and their attitudes, and to be able to see the light and to see them with compassion, and to see them really as wounded, because we know that wounded people wound other people. So in order to transcend anything, there has to be like, oh, I have to consider that I'm not on the right side, I'm here, but there's over here. And that if you can hold the tension between those two, then eventually a new attitude emerges. And so that's what I think we're being challenged to do right now. And that's why, there's this constant worry among people who are fighting for equity. But, again, if they maintain a separateness from the rest of the world, all that happens is the other that they think is the other just entrenches in those positions. So there's one example of an organization that I really love. I don't know if you've heard it. It's called Parents for Peace. Have you heard of Parents for Peace? Oh my gosh, check it out. So Parents for Peace is an organization that works to de-radicalize extremists. So often it'll be a family member who's very disturbed by a member of their family that's become radicalized and like just crazy radicalized is what's going on right now. And because it's almost a kind of intervention, and because of the love of the family members, many times that radicalized person is willing to participate in this conversation with normal people about being radicalized. Because all you do by criticizing and demeaning people who have been radicalized is cause them to feel less and less worthy. So anyway, that's a perfect example, I think, of here you think there's this opposing thing. There's this radicalized person that holds these awful views, and then there are people who do not, but they are working together, and think about the transformation for both of them, the transformation for the person sort of facilitating the process with someone that maybe in the past you'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm sitting down and talking with you. So anyway, so that's, this holding the tension between what seems to be an opposition is what we also have to do with sort of patriarchy in general. So there was a time when women, their bodies, their sexuality were actually revered. There's evidence of this. There's evidence how there was a time when it did not even occur to them to be violent or to subjugate women. And so how we got from there to here has a lot to do with the coincidental timing and mixing of the emergence of patriarchy and the development of religious doctrine. And those two things, how they fed into each other. So at the end, violence against women or violence is motivated by fear, and violence against women is fear of the feminine. And so women then, so if our original state was to be revered, and then all of a sudden there was this long process of, there was something about women that triggered fear in this growing system of patriarchy. And so it's interesting that, we carry this sometimes, and I'm very in touch with it, this collective fear when our original position was one of power and reverence. And so again, patriarchy isn't just about men and women anymore. And the hopeful thing is that the feminine has broken out of its imprisoned form, and it's everywhere now, right? So where men are getting wise to how they've suffered under extreme capitalism, for example, men who are embracing their roles as fathers, that's the feminine, that's the relationship. So men are embracing the feminine. If you look at the fields of architecture and urban planning now, they actually realize that in their designs, we need to enhance opportunities for human connection. That's the feminine. So there are lots of ways that the feminine has broken out into the mainstream, which is why it's really useful to, instead of think of patriarchy as a men-women thing, is it's really a systems thing. So violence is, so another way to look at the oppression of the feminine is violence against immigrants, is violence against relating, right? So that is a violence, that is a fear of the feminine. It's a fear of relating to the other. And then, the same thing with sort of the, suppressing voter suppression. It again, at root is this fear of relationship. It's this fear of the feminine. So, and then women's bodies are still this battleground. So even as we see the climax of police brutality, which again is motivated by a fear of the feminine, we also see even more severe and radical ways of trying to maintain control of women's bodies. For example, one particular law in one state, and it's always about reproductive rights, would actually allow the rapist to make a decision about terminating a pregnancy. Not even the woman would actually give a man that decision over a woman. So that just kind of gives me chills. But so again, so for me, women, their bodies and sexuality have everything to do with transcending patriarchy. And I want to suggest that women and men stop fighting patriarchy and instead suffer through this tension between what we perceive as opposing forces, and look at it and transcend it from looking at it as a gender thing to looking at it as just sort of these movements, these energies that are fighting with each other right now. Okay, so that's kind of the talking part or the lecture part. I want to share a story. So Hermaphroditis was, in Greek mythology, really represents the union of these opposing forces. So Hermaphroditis was the baby, the son of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love and relationship, and Hermes, who is the guide of soul, and Hermes is also a trickster. And I didn't know this part of it, but there was a feminine spirit, a naiad, it's called, who they represent the feminine spirit, and she was this particular one was very feisty, and she prayed to a god to be merged one with Aphroditus, and her prayer was answered. And so symbolically, Hermaphrodite or hermaphrodite really symbolizes this merging of the masculine and feminine and the original union of the two, because before there were two, before there was separation, there was one. And in fact, I have a tattoo that this is the symbol from a Netflix series called The Gift. And for me, it represents, I don't know if you can see it, it represents the union of same. So often we see symbols of the union of opposites. We're really in the beginning, there was just same. So let's see, I want to share a story, because what I'm talking about is, so far we've been in the masculine, it's intellect, it's academic, and I want to shift us a little bit to the feminine. And because in order to reconnect with the feminine, I think there has to be a reconnection with the body, because the body is the playground of the feminine. And your mind cannot prevent your sort of, oh, this is what I meant to say first though, before I get to that. In order to suffer through this tension of what we feel is in opposition with us, you have to transcend anger if you have it, which some women have anger, and that anger is based in fear. And that fear is based in either personal trauma or collective trauma. And so that lives in the body. So if you ever notice when you're triggered, you can't stop it. Your mind cannot stop you from being triggered, because that memory lies in your body. And so this is why we really have to do this work in the body. You can analyze it later. You can beat yourself up about it later if you are triggered, but you can't stop it with your mind. You have to go to the wound, the place in the body where the wound is. And that's where we have to go. So I'm gonna share a story that seems really silly, but it's simple, and I think it just gets to the heart of it. And this is my story, but I suspect a lot of women have felt this. So a couple of months ago, I was walking into a gas station by where I live, and the owner there, or the worker, like, loves it when I come in. I'm a friendly person. I'm a pretty lady. He likes to chat with me. It's just, a lovely little interaction with somebody. And on this particular day, I walked in, and there was a couple of men, and the man looked at me and he said, "Oh, why don't you smile? You're so pretty." And I was just like, ah! And I felt so enraged. I was triggered, but I could not respond in the moment, because I learned over my life to think before I speak, right? That's not always a good thing, to think too much before you react. So I'm like, what is it with men telling women that they should smile and how they should look? So I walked out, and I just felt really, I wanted to vomit, basically. And it was interesting because, and the reason I wanted to vomit is, what did I do? I kind of smiled. So I didn't want to smile at him. I was enraged at this man. And then when I walked out of the gas station, I was mad at myself. So I was mad because I was mad at myself. I'm like, why does this bother me? And it was a really complex mixture, because I didn't want it to bother me, but it did. And I felt like he got away with something. He had power over me because I did what I didn't want to do. And Rion Eisler talks a lot about how women eventually were trained to really be more concerned about the honor of their men than their own feelings. And there is a part of that remains, that we will choose sometimes pleasing someone else, and we're not even really choosing it, it's automatic. So I had a little talk with myself, And during my midlife unraveling, when I knew I wasn't going to be married anymore after 24 years, all of this stuff came out of my unconscious. It was a lot of shame. And it was a lot of shame having to do with not only sexuality in men, but with also the religious messages that I received. The religious messages that I received were this is the early 90s, awful. In fact, Marquette knows, they call this the time of their dark ages at Marquette. What I was told in theology classes, they should be ashamed of, about why women have pain in childbirth, because we're paying for Eve causing the downfall of humanity, just all kinds of stuff like that. So after my marriage ended, I had all this complex mixture of shame related to sexuality and men and also religion. During this time, I also realized that I'm very in touch with the trauma of sexual violence committed against women. That's collective and not mine. It's not personal. I have never been assaulted. I had a weird thing happen to me when I was in my 20s, and a guy broke in my window and he masturbated at the bottom of my bed. And then I woke up and I chased him out. You could kind of consider that assault, but really I do not feel like I have lived through personal sexual violence like many women have. But yet I carry this triggering, and I carry this collective sort of wound of centuries of women being oppressed and centuries of women who were killed just because they were women. So during my midlife unraveling, I also became swept up in this romantic relationship with a younger man who was an evangelical Christian. And I'm religious, but not tied to a framework. And I was so excited to learn about him. And I used my depth psychology lens. And at first, our conversations were very neutral. And then towards the end of our relationship, he said this thing about, well, God created men for women, to be a helper or whatever it was. And I was like, all over again. I was like, my body was just flooded with fear and anger. And I walked away and I was mad at myself again. I was like, I don't have a reason to be afraid. It's just his opinion. But why do I carry this triggered fear in my body? And so I'm dragging this out because it's really complex. And I think individual women and men sometimes don't give it the time and reflection that they need. And they don't realize that this might be in their bodies. But, women, have been talked into their own oppression and anger. So they have very righteous anger around it, but it doesn't in the end get us as far as we want to go. So back to my story. I had a conversation with myself about my fear. I remember that at one point, women and their bodies and sexuality were revered. And so I tried to imagine a world where a man would not think of abusing a woman because of how they revered the woman as being a creation of God, right? Like there would just be this reverence. And I thought, okay, that's my original state. I can access that original state and work through that. I don't really have to be fear. And here in our country, I literally don't have to be afraid, for the most part. I can have my own opinions and do my own thing. So the next week, this was very interesting because my psyche will bring me the events that I need to sort of come full circle. The next week, I was walking through a parking lot and a guy yelled something out a window. It was something, I don't know, maybe not disrespectful, but just inappropriate, and I was like, oh, but I didn't feel anything. I felt nothing. I felt really neutral, where in the past I would have been triggered and would have gotten angry, wouldn't have been able to respond. I not only didn't feel anything, I didn't acknowledge him. I walked away and I flipped him off. It was kind of like a silent fuck you. Sorry, my son has me saying that word now. I'm just like, and that was the first time that I was able to respond in the moment in a way that felt empowered. And so it has taken me all this time. I'm 55 or 56, something like that, 55 years old. And it's taken me all this time to sort of heal something so that I don't have this fearful trigger. And it has been helpful to know that this original state of women is one of reverence. And so then I started thinking about when we get to the place where we are immune to the people who are seeking to oppress us in some way, we stop cooperating with them. So that's what I'm saying about fighting. So if we're fighting and we're triggered by this righteous reason, we are still being pulled into the oppression, as opposed to being like, huh, that's interesting. That's interesting. You think that? Oh, that's really silly, actually. That's like ridiculous. And so this is kind of where I'm trying to take the conversation. And really, what that is nonviolent resistance. So, from a depth psychology perspective, if you have sort of understood or learned how to understand psychologically what's going on with nonviolent resistance, that's what you're doing, is you're catching the oppressor off guard with your neutrality. And when you do that, there is a space and there's an opportunity for a different reaction, because they also, the oppressor, are counting on you responding in a different way. So it's like a very complex, unconscious conversation that's going on beneath the surface. So this is really like applying nonviolent resistance to, I mean, honestly, you could apply it to everything that's going on right now, because all of these opposing forces are coming together, clashing, hoping that a transcendent third, new attitude, new position is going to take root. And it's very messy in the meantime. So yeah, so that's my personal story. I hope that it makes sense, like what I'm trying to get across. There was one thing I wanted to do before I then would love to spend the rest of the time just having a conversation. I said that this work really needs to be done in the body. And so if you are willing, I would love to guide you through an exercise using what's called active imagination. So it's literally what it's called. You use your imagination. And so I'm just going to guide you. And then you're just going to see where your mind and your body goes. And so just to let you know where I'm going to guide you, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and imagine that you're about to get on an elevator. And the elevator is going to go to a place in your body. I don't know where it is. You might already know where it is. I already knew where mine was going to go when I did this. You may just let it go, or you know. And then I'm going to guide you through getting into the elevator, going to that place in the body, getting out of the elevator, seeing what's going on. And then I'll, at some point, you can walk around. At some point, I'll ask you to get back into the elevator, come back up, and then just sort of sit with your experience for a minute, and then see. And if you're willing, I'll share my story. I'm going to overshare. If you're willing to kind of talk about what your experience is, and I will help you with that, because then my experience will make sense too. So would everybody be willing to do that? We can get out of our heads and into our bodies, and hopefully it'll be a really cool experience. So, and we'll just do it for 5 minutes. So if you are, so I hope the people who just turned off their video are going to do it. Okay. They probably just don't want me to stare at them with their eyes closed. Okay. So take a deep breath, because I've been talking nonstop for 20 minutes. And take another, just try to get another breath down into your belly, all the way down into your belly. A little tidbit: people who don't breathe down into their belly have an increased risk of heart attack. So if you're not like breathing down into your belly, it really contributes to your health. And then I'm going to count us backwards so we get to sort of a deeper level of state of mind. I'll just count from 10 to 1. So breathe in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So keep your eyes closed and imagine that you are standing in front of an elevator. And really just notice, what does your elevator look like? What kind of building is it in? What's the lighting like? What's the coloring like? And now you walk to the button and you press a button up or down. And your hand will probably naturally go to one of those. Or maybe you're like, I don't know. And just notice that. and press the button. How long does it take for the doors to open? Does it open right away? Is there a loud ding? Is it kind of quiet? And just really use all your senses to experience it. If the doors have opened, walk in and either allow them to close, or if you're impatient like me, press the button, or maybe you're nervous, so you're hoping they take a while to close. And then maybe you know where it's going and you can see numbers or floors or parts of the body. Maybe you don't. Just ride the elevator and notice how many floors you go, up or down, and what's the speed. Is it fast? Is it a clunky elevator? And if you've arrived, allow the doors to open and take a step out and notice where you are. What part of your body are you in? What is the temperature like? What's the humidity like? What's the lighting? Is it a bright place? Is it darker? Are there caves? What really just allow your imagination, because your imagination is your soul speaking to you. And if you want to walk around, go walk around. It may be a small space. It may go on forever. There may be a path. There may be something calling you. Is there somebody else there? You may be skipping. What does your body feel like? Is it curious? Is it nervous? Is it sad? What emotion are you feeling? And just kind of explore. Or if you're getting agitated, go back to the elevator. Go back to the elevator whenever you want to. And so when you feel like you've kind of, yeah, okay, and really just, what are the colors? What are the sounds? What is the temperature? What are you touching anything? Oh, I didn't touch anything when I went down to my part. What does it feel like? And then you can head back to the elevator if you're not already there. Wait for the doors to close and push a button, or just it'll automatically go up to where you started. And then if you've reached that place and the doors have opened, walk out and see if you're in the same place you started. Notice that. And then if there's a chair nearby, like it's a hallway in a hotel or whatever, if there's a chair nearby, go take a chair and sit down. And then just kind of soak it up. Your imagination may keep going too, or just kind of soak it up. And then when you're ready, open your eyes. And then if you're willing to let me see your faces again, turn it, oh, good. So I'm trying to figure out if I feel like I want to hear from you first, because I don't want to have my story interfere with your just sort of natural experience. So are any of you willing to share your experience?
Sure.
Great. Who said sure?
Adelaide.
Oh, Adelaide, great. Thank you. Tell us.
So it kind of looked like it was in a forest area at first, but I didn't look around at it much. And then there was a bit of an arched door, and I rode up to one of my ribs near the heart. At first I thought I was going to go to the heart, but decided to go to a rib instead. And I kind of walked out there, but it was really shaky. And so I walked back to the elevator and looked around out from the elevator for a while, and then I went back. And then there was a lot more to the forest that I saw when I returned.
Well, tell me about the forest.
I don't know too much. It was just that there were a lot of trees and I could see it went on for a lot. They were really tall. I also noticed that there weren't really any that were cut down, because when you said if there's a chair, sit down, I thought, maybe there's a stump, but there wasn't.
Interesting. I love it that okay, so you basically walked out on one of your ribs, but you're like, oh, this is a little shaky.
Yep.
I love it. Oh my gosh, symbolism of ribs. I don't know, I've never looked that up. And then I love how you went into the elevator, but you kept the doors open. It was just like it was a safer place for you, or it was like more
Yeah.
steady? Adelaide?
Yep.
That's what you were thinking?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
So tell me about your emotions. Like, what were you feeling?
I was feeling pretty scared when I was out on the rib because it felt like I could fall a lot.
Okay.
Otherwise, I was really curious.
Okay.
And I wanted a sense of freedom. When I was originally thinking of going to the heart, I was thinking there's the whole system of blood vessels I could just travel through.
Ooh. So it's like the blood vessels could take you places.
Yeah, anywhere.
Oh my
Well, in the body, but
Okay, so I mean, that's already so rich and so juicy. And this is what I love about depth psychology, is that the language of our unconscious, our psyche, and our soul is image. And you can kind of realize that when you notice when you're particularly drawn to something, it's an image. And an image isn't just a visual image. It's also like a feeling and emotion, and it's an experience, really, that sort of, and it can be tied to a metaphor. So if we begin to, James Hillman was always about bringing back sort of the enchanted way of living, a more metaphorical, more symbolic way of living, which, when religions first developed, they were very symbolic. And so the power, and we really lost the power of ritual and symbolism. So anyway, so just like kind of real quick, the forest is a place of transformation. So it's very interesting that so much of it is interesting. I would encourage you to really, number one, journal about it, and number two, try to draw it. And when you journal, what you'll do is you'll say, okay, rib, what does that mean to me? What is my association to rib? And you might actually, there's a, if you Google dream meanings, there's an A to Z dream dictionary. It's not prescriptive. So you have to be careful that only if it resonates with you is it a potential meaning for you. Everyone has a different kind of meaning. So rib, and the fact that you wanted to walk across the rib, but it was shaky, and really where it seems you wanted to get to was the heart. The heart is the place of the feminine, and that these blood vessels, the feminine energy, could take you places, could you would have freedom, liberation. I mean, to me, that really is indicative of sort of this reconciling with the feminine energy. And then this forest, and the fact that there were so many trees, it's a virginal forest. I mean, virgin really didn't have to do with sex in it originally. Virgin had to do with undisturbed, like nature, undisturbed nature. And so the forest is a place of transformation. And then arch is very symbolic as well. I mean, when I think of arches, I do think of religious symbolism, arches, and an arch is also a threshold. And you have a lot of symbols of sort of going through a transformation, because an arch is an in-between space. It's between this and that. And sometimes when you're in the threshold, I was in the threshold for like 4 years of my midlife unraveling, where I had my foot in the past, I had my foot in the future. I didn't know what I was replacing things with, that I was letting go. It was felt very shaky. which may have to do with the shakiness in the rib. And then the place of safety in the elevator. Oh my gosh, that is so juicy, Adelaide. So the way that you could journal about this and work this, there's a book by Robert Johnson called Inner Work, and I use his process. Is you just write down you write down the whole experience like a dream, and then you separate out the images, and then you just try to find association. So for you, when I think of rib, I think of this. When I think of rib, I think of this. When I think of rib, I think of this. And then when you do that with the images, then you ask yourself, where is this in my life? Where is this shaky place in my life? Where is this feeling that I want to go here. I want that blood. I want those vessels of life energy. Blood is life energy. Like, where is that? And then where do I feel like I'm in this forest where I just don't know what's going to happen next? And there is guidance and messages in that for you. And so you may know inside something's going on, but when you use these tools of the unconscious, sometimes you can get guidance and you can make sense of what you're being drawn to. That if you think about it with your mind, you might be really nervous about it. But if you sort of understand that your psyche is just trying to help you, and this is good, it's actually good that this is happening to you. Oh, wonderful. Anybody else want to share?
Before then, thank you so much for explaining that. That's fascinating. I love symbolism. And to hear that much about what it could symbolize.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. So your imagination, I remember when it was really hard for me to understand, like, okay, when I create a fantasy, I'm doing that. No, when you have images, that is not coming from your mind. You're not doing that. They're coming to you. And so this is in dream. Well, I work dreams with people too, but this is the more feminine language. The masculine language is very academic. It's very black and white. It's very linear. The language of the feminine, the language of the unconscious is paradoxical. It's actually paradoxical. This and this. And and so it takes practice to actually, I just find it really exciting. I've made so much sense out of my life and had the courage to do things that I might not otherwise have done because I trust. But it's also not easy to interpret. So if you wake up and you're like, oh, I know what that dream is about. Nah, you're wrong. Dreams only come to us when they're trying to communicate something new, a new insight. So good. I'm glad you appreciated the exercise. One more person want to share? Oh, great, Jean.
Well, I thought I'd share just because my experience was so very different. My elevator took me up, and when I walked out, I was overlooking water.
Ooh. And then what?
As far as like being in touch with my body, interestingly enough, it was my feet, like feeling grounded, which to me that seems like an interesting combination of seeing open body of water and yet feeling grounded in my feet. So
that's very powerful. So water is a symbol of the unconscious. It's a big symbol of the unconscious. So that is fascinating because at once it seems to me, you are able to be open to the unconscious without losing a feeling of groundedness. And it's hard to stay grounded when you start sort of exploring things in your unconscious. So what were you feeling emotionally about the water?
Oh, water just to me is freedom. It's space. I can breathe. I feel both invigorated and comforted at the same time. I'm a swimmer. So I don't know. I just like when I'm in the water, it's just my element. Yeah.
I mean, even journaling about that would be interesting, knowing that I'm drawn to the water too, but I'm drawn to the beach. I'm drawn to the beach. When you're finding yourself really I think for me, it feels like you have a really good relationship with your unconscious. It does.
I don't know. I feel like, well, I'm a Buddhist practitioner, so I have a little bit of experience with meditation, and maybe that's helpful too. I mean, I by no means consider myself an expert, but I, have a little experience. So I wonder if that's part of it. Because meditation for me, I mean, when I'm in the water, it's an opportunity for me to meditate. And it's fascinating when you invited us into that experience that felt meditative to me. I was in the water. So I'm in the water meditating. And when I'm meditating, I'm in the water. Do you know, see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh, yes.
what a wild kind of experience. now
Oh,
that I'm saying this out loud, I'm like realizing how fascinating that is.
yes. And you could go a lot of places with it if you're willing to. And drawing, I mean, drawing is also, I often do active imagination with, I have people draw, and then you're bringing form to something. And even as they draw, I just ask questions, and see what resonates. And I know enough about symbolism to kind of go, oh, water. Okay, well, that's a great starting place. And to do this for like an hour with somebody, and then it just goes where it goes. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's why, whatever it is. So yeah, so I love working with the unconscious. It's not always a pleasant thing, right? So like when all that shame came up for me, I had to go through a lot of discomfort. But I knew I had to reconcile with that stuff. And if you don't reconcile with it, then it just gathers kind of a negative energy, and it'll come out anyway, but it won't be like in a pleasant way. So I know we're getting to the end, but I just want to quickly explain my, I call this image Womb on Fire, and it's what emerged, it was about 2 years ago, it's what emerged after sort of processing my own wounds related to the feminine and the masculine, because where I went in the elevator, I knew I was going to my stomach. I have like a love-hate relationship with my stomach. I'm like, my body's perfect except this. Like, what is that about? And then sexual, but it's also the place of sexual and spiritual wounds, right? It is like, whoa. So when I said women, sex, and God, it makes sense that I went right down to the heart of it, into my womb. And then over time, I had lots of dreams. I had a whole phase of dreams about the phallus symbol and about penises. And I would love to walk through that, because that is a symbol of creative urge. So the penis I have a blog post about what does it mean when a penis shows up in your dream. So what was interesting is this was a spontaneous drawing. It was like one day I had to draw this. And this was 2 weeks before I presented my first Alverno workshop. So something had been living in me, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And then it all came out, and I was having hot flashes at the same time, menopause symptoms. And so I drew this, and I just was like, taken phallus to me meant I do this creative urge, and to bring form to what was in it. And it was a volcano, and it was my mad woman, crazy and purple and God, and like all of it came together for me. And then I did this amazing workshop at Alverno. It was my first one where I was kind of talking about this topic. So that was over time though. I had done that elevator thing like 2 years before. I work my dreams like all the time. I work my complexes all the time. And then I would never be where I am right now, where I'm writing. I didn't even know that I would be doing that. And that was because I did this work. Something very unexpected came out of my unraveling. So I hope it makes sense, like why I had you do that, because the work of transcending fear-based movements or fear-based reactions it's the body. The key is the body and the feminine. And so the more that you sort of, if you're triggered by someone, that's work to do. If you're triggered by something oppressive, you can't really respond to it. You're reacting to it. And so then therefore, on a personal level, you can't get beyond it with your next relationship, but also on a collective level, we can't get beyond that to this place that we're really imagining, which is this union, this reconciliation between of everything, this heaven on earth thing. So there is really a really good book that, because I think about the book of Revelation and I kind of think like, well, first of all, Aquaman was the book of Revelation to me. So I wrote a blog post about that. Oh my gosh. Oh, it was all there. And then all this stuff going on. But his name is Robin Robertson, a depth psychologist, wrote a depth psychology interpretation of the book of Revelation. And it really is talking about what's happening right now. It is this ultimate reconciling. And if you look at, reconciling of, bringing together heaven and earth, you can look at it literally, but you can look at it symbolically and metaphorically. And all this climaxing of all these opposing forces are really looking for transcendence. It is like it's testing us. Can we do it? Is it going to be now, or is it going to take another 50 years? And so only by doing our own work will we be able to, be helpful in holding the space for other people to be able to do the work. So I hope this was interesting. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, one more slide. Okay. I write blog posts about all kinds of stuff. My voice combines kind of storytelling with a little bit of theory, but theory that's very accessible. And I do some short stories as well. And I've shared one poem. And then I do have coaching services. So I do this kind of work with people one-on-one. And then, yeah, so if you're interested in knowing when I publish a blog post, you can subscribe on my website. And yeah, and I'm looking for people who either find me entertaining or they get some healing out of my writing. And so I really appreciate when people share things that they enjoy reading, so that I can continue to build in preparation of, publishing my memoir and my research. So does anyone have any questions or?
Well, I found this very thought-provoking and taking me to some new spaces too. I've put a very short evaluation link in the chat. So if you can take just a couple minutes, there's really only just a couple questions, but as we know, this is Alverno, and feedback is extremely important to everything that we do.
Yes, I appreciate it, because I get it done.
And Deborah appreciates that too.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we were able to join in this space together today. And I know Bernadine had to leave, but she private messaged me and she said, I want to see the recording. I don't, I want to see how this continues. So
Oh, good.
She did want to continue being part of this group.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.